Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 31st of October and today I will be going over the Vuhledar and Donetsk fronts. For the sake of brevity, I won't be mentioning what happened in Lugansk, but I will have a separate video talking about that in the future, especially if there are some more significant changes. Also, I won't be talking about the recent Russian strikes on different production facilities or energy facilities, but I will add all of the markers to the map so you can get a clear understanding of what was reportedly hit. So anyway, let's move on to the video itself. Now, what happened in the Vuhledar front today is that the Ukrainians reinforced their positions over here. They sent in a lot of reinforcements from different units, most notably the 68th Yager Brigade, but there were also a bunch of other ones. Some were moved in from Bakhmut, and just from the territorial defense brigades and all of their reserves in general, just moved in to hold the line for as much as possible at Pavlivka. And so they actually launched several counterattacks in order to prevent any sort of Russian gains. And so they did this specifically around Shevchenko and Yaharivka. The reconnaissance battalion of the 68th Yager Brigade was attacking in this rough area. They were basically probing the Russian lines to sort of pin them down in this certain area so they couldn't redirect those troops to fight in Pavlivka itself or to advance onto Vuhledar. There were also, according to the Russian sources, several Ukrainian attempted counterattacks in the direction of Pavlivka, so they were trying to push the Russians out of Pavlivka once they had actually gotten a foothold in here. And the one other place where they tried to counterattack was on this road over here. It is a pretty minor road. It's from Vodyane to this town, Solotke, over here. And so there was actually an attempted counterattack in this area, which is understandable because it's really the only way for the mechanized units to advance in this area. And so there was just some clashes over here. The Russians were not able to gain any ground today in the specific area, although they have consolidated their gains around Pavlivka, the southern part of Pavlivka, and the heights that are just to the east of Vuhledar and to the south of Novomikhailivka. And so let's go to Pavlivka specifically, where, according to Russian sources, about 60% of the town is under their control. Right now, I'm using the dividing line, this dividing line as the highway, but it is possible that the Russians have actually extended their gains to this rough area where they reached the 00532 road and took over some of these residential buildings. That is certainly possible. The reason why I say this is because there are reports of the Russians reaching the Kashlachka River. I don't know how to pronounce it, but this river is important, especially if there are any crossings that are still intact. The Russians could use that to cross over and try to take over this agricultural enterprise, which is now being used as a base by the Ukrainians. They are fighting tooth and nail to maintain their forward positions over here, and it's also possible that they still have positions in the northern parts of the town in some of these residential areas, maybe in the gymnasium, maybe in the supermarket. There's also a mini market over here. And so in this town specifically, you have the 110th Mechanized Regiment and the 529th Mechanized Regiments. And those are both from the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, which is from Bakhmut, but they moved over some of their units to fight in Pavlivka. Also, you have the 1st Special Purpose Brigade from the National Guard of Ukraine. You can see that the main Russian unit that is involved in the advance on Pavlivka is the 36th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. And so this unit is a part of the 29th Combined Arms Army. And so they're doing most of the advances over here. Russia is mainly the one doing the artillery advances, while you have a lot of DPR regular troops that are involved in actually advancing at the beginning of the assaults. Also, you have the 39th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, which is responsible for the attacks on Novomikhailivka. So in this town specifically, there were attacks from the road from Solotke leading up north. And so there was an attack from the south, and then there was also, in tandem, an attack coming in, probably from Slavny in the direction of the east. And so in this area, the Ukrainians still have full control of Novomikhailivka. There is a bit of a gray zone over here where the situation is a bit fluid in the southern part of the town, but for the most part, they do have still control of this town. The units that Ukraine has situated in this area are the 79th Air Assault Brigade and the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, and so they're tasked with holding the line. I want to remind everybody that Novomikhailivka is incredibly fortified, and it is sort of like an urban type settlement. And so as a result, they're able to utilize basically every single building to their advantage. I have no doubts that there are basically zero civilians left in here, and so they can occupy whatever positions they want in here to slow down the Russian advance. Also, you can see there are a few of these like agricultural enterprises over here. Those are very copious, especially in this part of Donetsk. And so this is all being used to Ukraine's advantage. All of these different positions over here, and they're being struck as well. You can see actually this is one defensive fortification that was utilized by the Ukrainians. I'm not sure who controls it now, but you can see that there are probably some trenches over here. There might have been, after the taking of the satellite image, different fortifications added, like, I don't know, pillboxes or foxholes, something like that. And so this is just one of many defensive strongholds that Ukraine has set up in this entire area. Another thing to mention that is important is that Russia effectively has fire control of the road from Pavlivka to Kostiantynivka over here, meaning that there really isn't speedy coordination between the groupings in Vuhledar and Pavlivka, and with those in Kostiantynivka, and by extension those in Novomikhailivka, and the ones in Marinka as well, further to the north. Obviously, they can still communicate by going north and then like linking up in Kurakove, but this obviously takes longer, and it's more difficult because it will take longer for the like equipment or troops or whatever to be transferred, and really as they're moving along, they can be hit by Russian drones or by Russian artillery or something like that. And look, there really aren't many ways for Pavlivka, for the garrison in Pavlivka, the Ukrainian one, to connect to the rest of the Ukrainian interior. They can't use this highway anymore. This one is contested at the moment. They can use this one to a certain extent, but it is under Russian fire control, which does make it incredibly difficult. And so they would have to basically sacrifice a lot of their men in a retreat or in any sort of reinforcement, or they can go through these open fields over here, which is certainly possible, but they could get bogged down with the mud, or they can get struck by the Russians. And so they are in a bad situation, but there is still a silver lining for the Ukrainians that I want to mention. It's the fact that even if Russia takes Pavlivka, that does not mean that they will have an easy time of taking Vuhledar. In fact, taking Pavlivka might be it might cause a lot of casualties for the Russians, and I'll show you why. Look, let's imagine they take over this entire area. The Ukrainians are still situated in Vuhledar, and they still have control of the coal mine. So their flanks are still protected in this area. And so they have control of the high ground over here. They can use all of these apartments to their advantage, and they have a very good vantage point and a very good position to see where the Russians are stationed, because Pavlivka relative to Vuhledar is in a lower elevation. And so from there, you can have sniper fire or like anti-tank fire, mortars, whatever. And that could cause a lot of damage to the Russian forces over here. And we actually have empirical proof of this because the Russians used to control Pavlivka. And when they did in the summer, the Ukrainians were constantly firing on them. And because the Russians were in these houses, they couldn't really see their flanks. They didn't have their flanks solidified. They were just all stationed in this one village or whatever. And then from there, they got potentially flanked, or they were about to get flanked from the sides, and so they were forced to retreat before they would get encircled. And so there is still the opportunity for Ukraine to counterattack or to just hold the line as long as they hold Vuhledar. If they lose Vuhledar, that's a different conversation. They would then have to abandon a lot of their these open fields over here. They could center a new defensive line around, say, Novoukrainka and this town over here, Bohoyavlenka and Vodyane. And if that doesn't work, then they would have to go to this line, which is centered around Velika Novosilka and this road that connects it to, say, Novomikhailivka. And so that is also possible. Velika Novosilka, interestingly, is in a very low elevation area. And so you would expect the Russians to be able to make better gains over here than in a high elevation area. So maybe they're going to try to flank, say, Andriivka in the future. But again, this is looking very deep into the future, because for the moment, I do think that this is just more of like a localized assault, especially because we haven't seen that many gains just yet. So now moving on to Marinka, where there are also battles going on at the same time as we have movements in Vuhledar. So in this area, the unit that is involved is the 150th Rifle Division, and so it is claimed that they have been able to advance a little bit. In terms of the distance, I would say about like a mile, a bit less than a mile. And they were able to take over some of the farming fields and farming centers to the north of Marinka. You can see I'm highlighting them. And then they actually entered some of the residential buildings and blocks that are just to the east of Druzhba Avenue, which is the main dividing line between the eastern and the western parts of the town. The most notable house or structure that they took was this school over here, the Marinska boarding school. You can see it's pretty large and was certainly being used to hold back the Russians, but now they apparently have control of it. So now they're really centered around the Osikova River. That's really the dividing line from the north. And then from the south, the dividing line is just the urban streets, where apparently they advanced by like 2 streets, and so that's very slow progress. They still haven't reached Druzhba Avenue. At some point, they actually were on Druzhba Avenue, and they were fighting next to like a lot of these schools and the government offices. But I think what happened is they got pushed back. Maybe it was in August or maybe in September, but I never got around to changing the map because there really wasn't ever talk about it. So now it seems as if they're trying to regain their positions that they had previously lost. During this assault on Marinka, the Russians also unleashed a very large artillery barrage, mainly from their BM-27 Oregons and their BM-30 Smerch multiple rocket launchers. And so those hit mainly Marinka, also hit Opytne, and a lot of these other towns, most notably Kostiantynivka, which is sort of the crossroads between the Vuhledar front and the Marinka front. So that is all interesting, certainly a future target for the Russians. But let's move on now to the Donetsk front, where I don't have that much to say, just I made a few different changes to the map. So you can see I gave the Russians control of a few more square meters of land in the fields just to the south of Opytne over here. You can see the new Ukrainian line is just based on these hedgerows, and the Russians there are slowly overrunning these positions. They're not in the city of Opytne yet, not really a city, just like a urban settlement. And so they haven't even reached the pond line yet. I know some maps have it marked like that, but I would caution against marking it like that, because we did actually see a Russian assault towards Opytne fail. We have actually footage of that. There were 4 BMPs that were destroyed by the Ukrainian defenders in this town. And so we know for sure that the Russians still haven't entered this general area. The unit that is involved in taking Opytne that I have been able to track is the 1st Slavyansk Battalion. There might be some other Russian unit that I'm forgetting, but this is the one that I was able to track based on like footage that they posted online of them using drones and destroying some Ukrainian trench positions. Now, a bit further to the west, you have Vodyane, where the Russians and DPR troops have been able to take over the southern portion of the town. And so now, again, the dividing line is these several ponds. There's also fighting near this reservoir over here in the fields south of Vodyane. Once the Russians secure these fields over here, they can actually go towards the western parts of Vodyane, and then from there they can reach the final Ukrainian line that is around these towns and actually flank Pervomaiske from the east and attack the Ukrainians in this area. But again, even the Russian sources that I'm reading from do acknowledge that the pace here is very slow, and it's even slower in Avdiivka, where I'm not even sure where the Russians would be advancing, because I can't find any area where they have been advancing over the past few weeks. If they are, then it's really just fights over like these bushes over here, or say blocks of land around Kamyanka, which is a tiny town just to the north of Avdiivka. But Avdiivka was mentioned recently, and also the Ukrainians, they reported that there were attacks in the direction of Avdiivka. Of course, they said that it was repelled, and it seems as if there were no differences to the map. They also said that there were attacks on Bakhmutske, so I'm going to show that on the map here. Bakhmutske is over here, a suburb of Soledar. They also reported an attack on Mayorsk, the train junction, a bit further south. On Avdiivka, as I said, Vesele, which is to the north. It's a town which is over here. I don't even know if it's a town at this point. You could look at the Google Maps. There aren't really any houses over there. Vodyane, as I mentioned before, there are actually two Vodyanes, so I'm not sure which one it's talking about. Marinka, as I said before, and Novobakhmutivka, which is over here. It's been contested for really so many months now. I'm sure that at this point, the entire town is destroyed, and still the Russians have not reached this key highway over here that they really do need to reach if they want to flank Krasnohorivka and then advance onto Avdiivka later on. So that's all I have for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys later.